Alright guys, welcome back to part 2. So this time we're doing the details and the materials for this axe. So to start off with, we're going to put in these bolts. So add some extra loop cuts into the main mesh. So you have like 9 vertices to work with, and then we can use loop tools. If you don't have that, it's a free add-on on Blender, so just search for loop tools. And then we can create a circle using those vertices and inset it like this to get this cool, easy bolt shape. So we'll do that a few times to get all of these bolts. Here you can see on the second one, while I'm doing it, I've realized that it's only hitting one side in the transparency. And that's because of the beveling we did in the first part. So beveling is a destructive modeling method. So after you bevel a corner, the vertices get a little bit fucked up. So it makes creating loop cuts a little bit more difficult. But I mean, it's not the end of the world for this model because I can just put the loop cuts on both sides manually. But it does slow down the workflow a little bit, which is a little bit frustrating, but you know, it's what you have to do sometimes. But just making all of these bolts real fast, and they all came out quite nice, I think, and it's a great detail to add. And then obviously I went into the materials mode just to see what they look like in the kind of rendered-ish version. And then you can see here that with this triangle, it's quite hard to get any consistent loop cuts, so I just had to move the bolt back so it was in the loop cuts of the main mesh. And this is why you want to use quads over tries when you can, because it makes small details like this that little bit harder to get right. So just make sure you're using them for a purpose rather than just putting them in because you're lazy, you know. So after we get those bolts in, you can see there's 3 little dots on the main body here that I wanted to get in, and that is literally just a case of creating some more loop cuts in the main body and aligning the quads, because the subsurface division is going to curve it ever so slightly anyway, so we don't have to change any of the vertices to make the curves manually, which is always helpful. And this is why I like doing subdivisions, because it gives you a lot more control over the kind of shape you're trying to get. And especially with this model, which is supposed to be molded metal, if it came out more square, it would have looked a bit weird. So I like the way the circles came out pretty much immediately. So I kind of just managed to get it on my first try, which is always good. But obviously play around with the vertices and see what works well for you, and you might have to crease it if you want a more square look. And then to the bottom of this cylinder, I just added a quick bevel, and now we're getting into the decals. So I just went into my preferred software for getting details, which is Canva, because it just has a massive library of loads of graphics that you can just use. But obviously, if you want something very specific, you can always go onto Google Images or Pinterest or something. And because we're using these on the model, it shouldn't be that much of a problem in the copyright sense if you're going to sell any of these models or whatnot, because we're using them as normals and bits and pieces. So it shouldn't be too bad. But here we go. I kind of had to eyeball what the graphics were, because obviously this photo is quite blurry that we're using for the reference. So I just got some cool graphics that I thought would look nice on this, and then we're going to go in and just start creating materials for the specific parts that we want to model the graphics into. And obviously it's just gone past, but I changed the color just so we can see what parts are being changed for this decal. So I do have another video on how to create these into normals using UV maps, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here. But basically, you just get the image texture in the shader, you add a bump node, and then you plug the image texture into the height and the bump node into the normal, and then you get something that looks like this. And I'm using kind of a cheap method for the UV unwrapping. I'm not a texturing expert by any means, I'm definitely more of a modeler, but I just did some smart UV unwrapping. But if you're using client work or you want a better end product, I would use seams and stuff, and I do use seams on the handle later on. But if your topology is good, usually you can get away with the smart unwrap. And especially with the decals, because we're only trying to get a certain section done, the UV unwrap really doesn't matter too much because we're not actually applying a material. We just need the shape of the decal to look good on the model. So here I'm just adding in this triangle onto the body, and then I also added that binary code onto the top because obviously it's sci-fi. And these aren't textures, these are normals. So we're not trying to change the color of these. These, in my mind, these were going to be pieces that are like branded on or engraved, etc. So just a lot of rotating and making sure they're exactly where I wanted them to be. And I think they came out quite nicely, and especially in the final render, which we'll get onto later, I think they came out really nice in the lighting, because obviously in this mode you can only see so much, especially since we're working with such a dark model as well. It can be quite tricky to figure out if the decals are going to come out nice. So then I'm just adding some new loop cuts into the handle, so we can get a little bit more, a few more polys to work with, a little bit more geometry, and then just adding in this cool, like, I don't even know what you call that, like a warpy shape. But the problem with this handle is the way it unwrapped was very weird, and I thought it might have been a normal problem, but it was actually just the way I was unwrapping, and it was basically cutting the geometry off in a weird way. So when I was trying to unwrap it, it was cutting everything at a weird angle. And obviously I'm not going to show you the whole problem here, but basically, like, as you can see, it's kind of leaving gaps in the mesh where the decal should be. And I was getting quite frustrated with it, to be fair. But that's kind of the problems you're going to run into when you're trying to do a quick UV unwrap like I was doing. But I did manage to fix it, but it was definitely a very bootleg way to do it. And as I said, I'm no material expert. So if you're trying to get really good UV unwrapped models, I would recommend looking at some tutorials on that. And obviously I'm trying to get better at it, and I will be bringing out tutorials in the future. But for this model, it is a train wreck when it comes to the decals. Like, see here, the decal is split in two. So basically what I did was check all of the normals, and I thought I'd leave this in just because you can see that not everything is perfect when you're modeling, and you're going to run into challenges, and you see a lot of YouTubers just show you the process from start to finish without any mistakes, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to show you the mistakes that went into my model and my thought process behind it and how I tried to fix it. So I'm going in now and creasing because I'm going to re-unwrap this to try and get a better unwrap so we can put these decals on properly. So applying the seams to the top and bottom faces so we can get those as just the cylinders like this on the side. And then I realized that the actual body is just going to come out in one line. So I just put two creases on the edges so it would come out a little bit nicer like this. And that looks like better UVing for what we're trying to do here. And now we can go in and get this cut off and put it in. And obviously it's still split here. So I just put them together in, in a weird sense and just try to figure out the orientation. So I'm just going in, and then now it actually comes out in one piece. It's amazing. And then doing the same with the top, obviously. And I thought it came out quite nicely. And then we just need to make sure the materials are all the same compared to the body. And here I'm just adding in the neon texture. But in sub D, sometimes it can be a little bit hard to figure out what parts need to be using the materials, so it's just another bit of trial and error. But most of the time I just take the subdivision off until I figure out where it needs to be. And then we're coming in here and creating a material for the bolts. So for now I'm just putting a grey in, but we're going to come back through and make it more of like a magnetic scratched metal surface right at the end. So make sure to stick around for that bit because it's very interesting. So now we've kind of got the base details in, so it's already looking quite good, but there's just a few extra details that we need to add, and that is what really takes the basic models to more of a professional feel. So for now, I'm just making sure that all of the normals have the same principal BFT that the main body does. And then I'm just going into the rendered mode in cycles just to see what it looks like overall. And I was quite happy with the way the colors were turning out and the way the lighting was hitting it. So it's a good start for creating those final touches. So on sharp edges, especially like knives and other stuff, the way that real life manufacturers make these is obviously sharpening the metal so it hits that point. So we want to create that sharpness texture in the software. So what I do is add a noise texture with a color ramp so we can control how big and small the darks and lights are, and then scaling one of the mapping points to create a streaked pattern. So for this example, I just scaled the Y massively, and then it created this cool grainy sharpened edge, which is more realistic than just keeping the edges like more shiny or just changing the color a little bit. And it just makes the overall model look a bit more real. So I'm just doing that for all of these edges. You can use the same material because we have the same material for the body, but it's quite an easy shading setup for such a good effect, in my opinion anyway. So then now I'm just going in and messing around with the emission of the neon parts of this axe. I didn't really like the color of the original reference, so I opted for a nice orange. And then now we're going into the bolts and we're trying to make this magnetic-esque texture for this. So I messed around with a few different kind of shaders. Most of the time you can get away with either noise or Voronoi. But for this one, I thought the wave texture would look the best. So as you can see here, it looks more manufactured with the imperfections. And I was just messing around with the different settings to see which one I liked the best. And I think I ended up with the ring on a very small scale. And then the last thing I wanted to do was make the emission a little bit more realistic as well, with a few different bright areas. So I just added in, again, a noise texture and created more of a wear and tear feel. Kind of like you see on neon lights in real life. Like they're not 100% bright throughout the whole thing. You have like dirt marks and chips and bits and pieces. So I decided to try and get the same effect. And it's very subtle, but I think it came out quite nicely in the final render. So that is basically the entire axe finished, if you've been following along. And now this is kind of an extra step, you don't have to follow along, but I'm just creating a final rendered image that I used as the thumbnail for these videos. So I'm just adding in a plane, I extruded the back face, and then I grabbed the edge between the extruded lines and then beveled it with a bunch of rotations. And then changed the color, added in a few area lights. And I thought the model by itself was not enough. So I decided to copy the entire model, put it in a new collection, and then now we have two that we can work with. And then we can use that to show off the edge in a close-up, and then also the full body from behind, which just makes everything a lot better, and it makes it easier to comprehend the scale of the axe. And then the final thing that I forgot to do when creating this model is set all the transformations, which is a very rookie error really. But I was just making this for the video, so it's not that big of a deal. But it basically means that if you're trying to rotate or scale things on their normal, they're all going to be messed up because all of the rotations are different. So you just have to select everything and use the global scale with the medium point to get it into a nice enough look. And then that's the final image done. And I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and learned something. And I'll see you in the next one.